Elementor users can finally try out the early alpha release of Editor version 4, which was shipped with the Elementor version 3.29 beta. Let's take a look at some of the features you can expect in the Editor version 4. To join the Elementor beta release program, head over to Elementor, Tools, and then Version Control. So that is Elementor, Tools, and Version Control. Over there, just activate the beta tester, set that to enable, and save your changes. After a couple of minutes, you can now head over to your dashboard and then updates, and you see the update to the beta release version. Once you've activated that, you can now head over to Elementor, Settings, and you see a new tab called the Editor V4. When I activate the tab, it now gives you the road to Editor V4, and you can choose to activate it. There will be a button to activate. It will take you through some prompts. Once you've done that, the version 4 will be active on your page. So now let's head over to the Elementor editor and see what are the new features that were added. Once you've successfully activated Editor V4, you'd see a new section in your Elements panel called the Atomic Elements. In it, you'd see 7 new elements, which are the flexbox, div block, the heading, image element, the paragraph, SVG, and the button element. You'd also see a new label that it is in alpha with an information. So if I click on it, you can see the strong warning that tells you you should try this out in a staging site and not in your live production website because it is still an early alpha release. Just test it out. If you notice any bugs, report them on GitHub. I'll leave a link to the GitHub repository in the description so you can go ahead and submit any bug that you may have noticed. The first thing to know is that the elements in version 3 are compatible with version 4. Remember when we had the sections and columns and we're transitioning to the containers, we were told that although we can use them on the same page, they were not fully compatible with each other. So you couldn't take a container and add it into a section or a column, or vice versa. So you couldn't take a section and add it into a container. But with version 3 transitioning to version 4, they can interact with each other. So you can take a container from version 3 and add a heading from version 4 into it, and they will work seamlessly. So now let's take a look at an example. Back in the editor, let me go ahead and drop in a version 3 container. Then within that container, I'll drop in a version 4 heading widget. Then let me go ahead and drop in a version 4 container into it. And within the div block of version 4, I'll drop in maybe a text editor widget. You can see I'm mixing and matching both the old and the new, and everything is being rendered correctly. There are no problems. I can change the container layout to maybe flex direction, row, and you see everything is working seamlessly. There are no problems. The next feature is that we now have a unified UI for the element features, and they are in a logical manner. Let me explain what I mean. So previously, with the version 3 elements, let me drop in a version 3 container, and I'll drop in a version 3 heading into it. You notice that the container, it has layout, style, and advanced, and the structures were like intermixed. So we have styling options within the layout. We had style within the style tab, and then we had styles again within the advanced. For the heading widget, it was now called content, style, and advanced. So the naming was different. The layout was different. The things we were adding in there were different. So there was a bit of confusion. But now let's go ahead and add in a version 4 flexbox. So I'll drop that into the edit area. Then I'll add a heading widget into it. And this time you can notice something different. So if I go to the flexbox, you notice that we have just 2 tabs. We have the general and the style. The general tab is for everything that has to do with HTML content, and the style tab is for everything that has to do with styling. So it is now more logical and less taxing on the brain to know where exactly do I find each feature. Now it is easy to understand. We know that anything that has to do with the HTML is in the general tab. Anything that has to do with CSS is in the style tab. So you can go to the HTML tab and you see you can add the HTML tag, you can add a link, and so on. Same thing when you go to the heading widget, it's the same. The HTML tag is within this general. So everything that has to do with the HTML content is in the general. Anything that has to do with the style is in the style tab. It's similar to another builder, which I use currently, that is Buildarius. That's the same structure that they went with. You can see this is Buildarius. If I select any element, they have the content tab and the styles tab. So every widget has the same thing. A content tab for every HTML and a style tab for every CSS property. Okay, let's continue. So that makes it easy to understand. And the other thing that is advantageous with this is that now, because the HTML is right front and center in a logical manner, we start with what is the HTML tag and the content and so on. Now with our containers, we can now easily know that we have chosen the wrong HTML tag. So let's say for the parent container, you want it to be a section. You can now see it clearly once you drop the element that the HTML tag is set to a div, and I don't want a div, I want a section. So I can now quickly change it into a section. Previously, with the version 3 container, it was there, but it was hidden. So first we go through so many styling options and we've already forgotten about what HTML we want to add. You have to now go down into the additional options before you get to see the HTML tag. So it was a bit confusing for the users, and oftentimes when you check almost every website, they always forget to change the HTML tag because it's seen as an afterthought. That is like the last thing you do on the widget, which should not be so. You should start with the HTML first before you go into styling. So now the order has been changed to become more logical. Following up with the unified logical structure, we also now have a clean HTML output. Now let's take a look at the HTML we already have on the page, and we'll preview it on the front end and inspect to see the output of the HTML. Let's take a look. So I'll go ahead and publish it, and I'll preview it on the front end. Let's take a look at both of them. So this was the old one with the version 3 elements, and this is the new one with the version 4 elements. Don't worry about the styling right now. We'll change the styles as we go along. So I'll right click, and then I'll inspect. And what you will notice is in the version 3, what we had was, it starts with the wrapper container, which let me go ahead and move it to the side. So we have the wrapper container that had an inner container. So that's 2 divs. Then we go into the actual widget. So that widget had 1 div, a second div before we get to the heading. But now with the new container, if I inspect it, you can see we just have that section element that I added and the H2. So just 2 elements, whereas before we had lots of divs before we get to our actual H2. The other nice feature I noticed is, let's go back to our elements, and this time I'll add a button widget. So a button, this is the version 3 button, and I'll add another button widget. This is the version 4 button into the version 4 widget. So ignore all of the stylings. Let's publish this, and I'll go ahead and preview on the front end again. So this time, inspect. I did not add any link. So watch what happens with the first one. We get, just for the button, we get a div with the Elementor widget button. Then we get another div with Elementor widget container. Then a div with the Elementor button wrapper. Then an A tag. Then a span and another span. So that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 elements for just a single button. Whereas with the new button, bear in mind that there is no link. If I inspect it, all you get is just a button element. So when there is no link, it is default to a button. When we now go ahead to add a link, if I go ahead to add a link to both of them, so let's say the first one has a link already. The second one, if I add a link and then I put the same hash or pound sign, let's publish this. We'll go on the front end and you see now, if I inspect it again, it converts to an A tag. So when there is a link, it switches to an A tag. Where there is no link, it switches to a button tag, which I believe is the correct approach, because an element without a link that performs an action is actually supposed to be a button, not an A tag again. Only when it is linking to a page, then use an A tag. If it's performing an action on the page, use a button tag. So they are going in the right direction. Same thing with the containers. If you set the container and then you add a link to the container, it automatically changes to an A tag. And watch one nice thing that you may not have noticed. Let me show you an example. We now have some form of collision detection. So let's say on the flexbox, I add a link and I give it maybe a hash symbol. So now it becomes a link. It will automatically deactivate the HTML tag of section and change it to an A tag. That's on the flexbox. Now let's come to the button and try to give the button a link. So click on the plus. You see, it gives us a warning. So whenever there is a link on the container, any widget I will try to put a link into, it will give you this warning. And you can say, take me there. And it takes you to where the link was to avoid any collision of A tags so that it doesn't break the HTML. So that is a very good job. Moving on from that, the other thing that will be added is the global classes for a more maintainable website. Let's take a look at how it works and some of the things that you have to bear in mind. So here we are back in our element. Let me go ahead and just style the buttons. Previously with the version 3, we'll go to the style tab and I'll just change the buttons. So the background color, I'll give it a purple, and the text color, give it a white. So we get our button. Now with the new elements, it is slightly different. You go to the style tab and now we are presented with two options at the top, which is the classes. So first we have what is called the local class, and then we have an option to add a global class. So global class works on multiple elements. So if you want to style multiple buttons at the same time, you can just give them the same unique name. It's like saying you're giving everybody a unique name as class 1A. So anything that to affect all of them, just you affect it on the class level. Then the local is you're affecting the individual student within the class. So I can now go ahead and give it any class name I want. So I can say the class is primary button. Notice that we can't add spaces. The moment you add a space, it means you are trying to add a new class. So it has to be a name without any spaces. So just alphanumeric symbols and then either dashes or underscores. So don't add spaces or some other special characters. So let me delete the space, and now I can add that primary button. That becomes the new name. Then I can go ahead and style this new class name called primary button. Let me now go ahead and change. First, I want to change the background. So I'll go to the background and I'll give it a background color of, let's say, maybe red or like a blue. Then I can change the typography because I'm trying to affect the text. I want to change the text color to maybe a white. And we get back something similar. Because this is still an alpha version, we don't have the CSS variables. So we don't have our global colors and then the global typography anymore. We now have to add them manually for now because it's still an alpha version. They are working on the CSS variables for the future releases. But yeah, that's how we have it with our button. Now, whenever I drop in a new button, let's say I drop in a button into a page, so the one with the symbol, and I want to style that button, I can just come to the style tab, and rather than having to go through the styling a second time, all I just do is call back my global class, which was called primary button, and the style is automatically applied. So that's how you can now make your maintainable website. And if I want to change it at any point in time, I just come to the class that is active and I make my styling changes. So now I'm on the second button. If I change the style, so I change the background color to say something like, let's go for that purpley kind of color. You see, all of them are changing at once. It will change on every page that you've used it. So just be aware, it's like changing your global colors. That's the same way you're changing your styles on that class, and it changes everywhere. However, if you want to change a specific property, but just for the individual element, you can now come to local. So let's say for the first button, let's say I want some kind of styles that only affects that singular button. I can now come to that local. If I click on it, it is the one that is highlighted. The other one is grayed out. That means it's not highlighted. Then I can come to, maybe this time I would say I want to get the spacing to be a bit bigger. So I'll say I want like the padding to be, by default, you see it is highlighted. I wish the highlight color was a bit different from this grayish color, but now this means that it is highlighted. Once you see this link, that means all of them are linked together. We have the top, right, left, bottom. I wish it was in the logical clockwise manner, which is top, right, bottom, left, but I guess we have to take it the way it is. So I'll say top. Let's say I unlink them, and I want the top to be 20 pixels, and so that is pixels. Also, because it's still in the alpha version, we can only select a specific number of items. We cannot use the custom units, which I love using. So now we are forced to use one of the units for now. It will be added in a future version. So now I say I want the top is 20 pixels. So that will only affect that local class. And the thing you have to notice is that the local styling always overrides the global styling. Because let's say I come to my global class now and I try to change, let's say on the same element, I go to the global class and I try to change the same size. So let's say this time on the spacing, I go to the padding. You notice that there's this icon here to show you that there is some style applied somewhere on that widget. So let's go this time. I want to change the entire padding for everything. So let's say 20 pixels or 40 pixels. You notice that all the other options changed, but that 20 pixels at the top does not change because I had applied a local class that basically overrides whatever the global class is being applied to. So that is something you have to note. And I don't know if you noticed what was happening. That let's remove all of these. This is one new thing that has been added. So I get rid of those, and you notice something. If I publish this and I go to the front end, this is something that I've been hoping for, and it has finally been added. And that is the ability to only style one part of the spacing or the size. So let's say only the top margin without having to affect any of the side margins. So if I come to my button and I expand this, you notice that the only thing that was changed was the padding block start. That was the only CSS that was applied. Previously, in an old widget, let's say the old button, if I go to the button and I try to do the same thing, I come to maybe the padding and I unlink it, automatically everything becomes 0. So you can't just change one property without changing the rest of the properties. But now you can do that. You can change only one property and you don't have to affect the other properties. The other properties are not zeroed out, they're just ignored. And finally, they've taken into account that we now like using the logical property. So rather than saying padding top, it now uses padding block start. Instead of saying padding bottom, it says padding block end. So saying padding left, padding inline start, and so on. So it's making everything more intuitive and more friendly for the right to left and left to right kind of text writing style. The other thing is that if I apply the style across all these sides, so let's go back to this element under the style tab on the local class, because that's one that is highlighted. Let's go back to our spacing, and this time I'll choose to link them and give an even spacing all around, and I publish it. You see a little difference. If I go to the front end, this time rather than having to do padding top, padding bottom, padding left, padding right, it just says padding and it applies the style across all of them. So it is intuitive and it is changing depending on how your styles were applied. With that being said, there are two things about the classes that are worth mentioning which may change in the future. The first is that although I gave it a memorable name for my classes, what is generated on the front end is still a random string of characters for the classes. And then the second one is that there is a two-class specificity, whether you're using the local class or the global class. So that might affect you using custom CSS, because the classes are a specificity of two classes. If your custom CSS is only having one class, then it will not work on the elements. So let me show you what I mean. So here on the button, you can see that I gave it a global class of primary-button, but on the front end, what is generated is a random character called g-some random string. So it is not really taking the class name that I imputed, and you can see it has a .elementor followed by that class name. Same thing with the local class, it has .elementor followed by the class name. So basically it is raising the specificity to a two-class specificity. As you can see, if I hover over it, you see the specificity is 0, 2, 0. So if you try adding any of your utility classes from your framework that uses only one class naming convention, this might override that class. I don't know yet. I've not fully tested it out because that is one limitation. Currently, we don't have access to adding custom CSS or a custom class name. So maybe that will be added in a future version. But yeah, just to show you a comparison with Builderius, we have something similar where we have the local class and the global class. But let's say I style the local class to have a font family of Arial, and then on the global class, I do something different, like say another font family. So it's the same thing whereby the local class always overrides the global class. But let's go to the front end. So let me save it and go to the front end and inspect that button. You'd see that the local class has the two-class specificity similar to Elementor. So it has the .builderius content and then a random character. But the global class, not only does it have the name that I put in, which is .test heading, it uses only one class specificity. So that is something that Elementor may want to consider. We are taking it in a good step because previously with the version 3 elements, let's say this button, if I preview it on the front end, the version 3 elements were a bit worse. Let's see if I can get where the color added. You see it uses a 4-class specificity for version 3 elements, but in version 4 elements, it now uses a 2-class specificity. But I'm hoping that maybe by the final release, it will be reduced down to a 1-class specificity for global classes and then a 2-class specificity for local classes. Finally, I'll just touch on builder accessibility. So now Elementor has improved the keyboard accessibility of their builder. So I'll show you now that you can literally use the builder with only a keyboard, and there's proper focus outline and proper focus. Let's take a look. So here we are back at the builder. Let me use my keyboard only. I'll press Ctrl L to go to the search bar and start tabbing through. So right now you can see there's a focus outline on the different icons at the top. When I get to the responsive controls, because it's kind of like a tab, I now use the arrow keys, so the left and right arrow keys. If I press the space bar, it activates that element. So tablet, mobile. If I continue with the tab key, let me just go back to the desktop, tab, then keep tabbing. And when I get to the element, because these are two different tabs, again, you use the arrow keys. So right arrow key on the style tab, I press the space bar, it opens that tab. Left arrow key, space bar, opens that tab. So now they're making it more intuitive and keyboard responsive. If I press the tab key now, I get into my settings, and that's an accordion. So I can press the space bar to close it, space bar to open it. So everything is working with just the keyboard. This is a drop down. If I press the space bar, it opens the drop down. I can use the arrow keys to navigate. Press the tab key again, and it closes the drop down, and I can keep going. So everything is now keyboard responsive. I can get to the close icon. I can get to the dynamic data tag if I want. But I guess there is a slight problem with, there's just a little bit of bug with the dynamic data tag. I can't access the data tag, and there is no like focus when I tab to the open a new tab. So those are the two things I need to work on. Okay, now I can get access to the, I don't know what happened before, the dynamic data tag. Before I wasn't getting access, now I can get access. So I think they have to look at it a bit more, but right now the elements are improved. With the previous containers, if I was on the old container, the structure was a bit different. So I'm tabbing through, but I'm not getting access. I'm not even sure where I am on the page, but with the new elements, they've improved accessibility. So Elementor are actually listening to the users. And yeah, those are the key features I wanted to point out. If I missed anyone out, please let me know in the comments. I know there are a bit of bugs here and there, but like I said, it is the early alpha release, so there are bound to be bugs that will be fixed as the time goes on. So if you notice any bugs, please report them on GitHub. I'll leave a link to the GitHub repo in the description so you can check it out and report any bugs that you have. And yeah, Elementor are definitely going in the right direction. I just think a few minor things that are missing, like the global variables, then the global attributes, and some color changes, because right now, although it is keyboard accessible, the colors are not easy to see sometimes. So I think some of those black and white colors, they might better change it to something like a blue color so it's easy to spot, or maybe they are dark pink or something. Well, yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you've learned something from this video. If you have, do leave a thumbs up, and please subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed already, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.